There is a specific kind of millennial you have probably met. They have a bachelor's degree, possibly a master's, maybe both. They are working a job that has nothing to do with either. They are still paying off the loans that funded them. And if you ask them what they studied, they will tell you, and then immediately explain why it doesn't matter anymore. Millennials are the most educated generation in American history. Nearly 4 in 10 have a bachelor's degree or higher, a rate that has no precedent. And the reaction from the outside world has been confusing. They say, good for you. Education is important. Knowledge has value. But they also ask, why can't you find a job? Why do you have so much debt? Why does your barista have a philosophy degree? Weren't you supposed to be the future? The answer to all of those questions is the same answer. Millennials were told clearly, repeatedly, and with great confidence that education was the path. They took the path, and then the path changed. Picture the scene. A millennial opens their laptop to apply for a job. The listing requires a bachelor's degree, 3 to 5 years of experience, proficiency in 6 software platforms, and offers a salary that, even accounting for inflation, would have been considered entry level in 2005. They apply anyway, because they have all of those things, and they get a form rejection in 48 hours because the applicant pool had 400 people with the same qualifications. Meanwhile, their cousin, who went to trade school, has a 2-year waiting list for new clients, owns their own work truck, and grossed more last year than the millennial has in the last 3 combined. The millennial does not go to trade school, not because they're stupid, but because 15 years of educational and cultural messaging has wired a very specific idea of what success is supposed to look like, and a work truck, however profitable, is not part of the picture they were sold. The easy answer is that millennials overinvested in education because they were naive, or because their parents pushed them, or because they couldn't hack it in the real world and kept retreating into academia. And look, there's something there. There's absolutely a subset of millennials who pursued graduate degrees not because the credential was necessary, but because the alternative was a job market they didn't feel ready for, and staying in school felt safer than finding out. That's real, and it's worth naming, but it explains a fraction of the story, because the majority of millennials who went to college, and took on debt to do it, were not making an irrational decision. They were making the exact decision the adults in their lives, the institutions around them, and the data available to them told them to make. The irrationality, if there was any, belonged to the promise, not the people who believed it. Force 1. The broken promise. For most of the 20th century, a college degree was a genuine differentiator. It signaled a specific level of capability, discipline, and preparation that employers couldn't assume from a high school diploma alone. And it delivered reliably on its promise of upward mobility. The data was clear. College graduates earned significantly more, were unemployed significantly less, and built significantly more wealth over a lifetime than those without degrees. Millennials grew up watching that data, hearing that data, being told by every authority figure in their lives that the degree was the key. Go to college, get the degree, the rest will follow. So they went, in numbers that no previous generation came close to matching. And then they graduated into a job market that had quietly moved the goalposts. Entry-level positions that previously required a high school diploma now required a bachelor's degree. Positions that previously required a bachelor's now required a master's. The credential hadn't become more valuable. It had become the floor. And a floor is not a distinction. Force 2. The credential arms race. Here is what happens when an entire generation is told that education is the answer. Everyone gets educated. And when everyone has the same credential, the credential stops doing the work it was designed to do. A bachelor's degree in 2024 signals roughly what a high school diploma signaled in 1980, that you completed the expected baseline. So millennials did what any reasonable person does when the baseline stops being enough. They went back for more. Master's degrees, certifications, specialized programs, additional credentials stacked on top of credentials. Each one purchased in the hope that this one would finally be the thing that made them stand out. The arms race has no natural endpoint, because the problem was never the amount of education. It was that the promise attached to education was never updated to reflect the reality of a market that had fundamentally changed. Force 3. The professional identity trap. This one is harder to say, but it belongs in the conversation. Millennials absorb the idea that what you do is who you are more completely than any previous generation. And embedded in that idea, for a generation raised on the language of potential and purpose and following your passion, was a quiet hierarchy. But many millennials were conditioned to see it that way. Professional work, knowledge work, creative work was presented as the kind of work that meant something, that signaled intelligence and ambition and worth. Whereas manual labor, trade work, service work was framed implicitly and sometimes explicitly as what you did if the other path didn't work out. That framing came from parents, guidance counselors, cultural messaging, and the marketing of higher education itself. Millennials didn't invent the hierarchy, they inherited it at a moment when higher education was being aggressively sold as the gateway to the right side of it. The result is a generation that, in some cases, pursued degrees not because the credential was necessary, but because the credential meant they were the kind of person who deserved professional work. And that belief, however understandable its origins, has occasionally produced millennials who are genuinely overqualified for jobs they consider beneath them, and genuinely unprepared for the trades and technical fields that are actually hiring. That tension is worth sitting with honestly. Force 4. The AI gut punch. And then, just as millennials were finally settling into the professional and creative careers they had spent a decade and six figures preparing for, the tools arrived. Artificial intelligence did not come for the factory floor first. It came for the writers, the analysts, the designers, the researchers, the paralegals, the entry level knowledge workers. It came, in other words, for the exact jobs that a college education was supposed to guarantee access to. The generation that was told to work with their minds, not their hands, is now watching the work of their minds get automated at a speed that no one predicted and no institution prepared them for. And the cruel irony is that the trades they were quietly discouraged from entering, the electricians, the plumbers, the skilled craftspeople, are among the most AI resistant careers in the economy. The hands, it turns out, are harder to replace than anyone thought. The degree, already worth less than the generation was promised, has become even less valuable still. And here is what connects the easy answer to the real one. The easy answer, remember, was that millennials overinvested in education out of naivety or avoidance, or an inflated sense of what they deserved. Both are true, and that is exactly the problem. Yes, some millennials retreated into academia because the real world felt too uncertain. And yes, the real world was made uncertain by forces entirely beyond their control. Yes, some millennials believe they are too educated for certain kinds of work. And yes, they were explicitly taught to believe that by the same institutions now charging interest on the loans that funded the belief. A generation was handed a map, told it was accurate, followed it faithfully, and arrived somewhere the map did not show. Well, that is a legitimate grievance, but it is also worth asking, at what point does the grievance become a cage? The generation that is most comfortable interrogating every other institution, the government, the corporation, the church, occasionally struggles to interrogate this one. The belief that education is always the answer is itself an inherited assumption worth examining, especially now, especially with the tools arriving faster than any curriculum can absorb them. So the next time someone raises an eyebrow at a millennial's degree, or their debt, or the gap between what they studied and what they do, understand what the degree actually represents. Not necessarily naivety, and not necessarily entitlement. A good faith bet placed on the best information available in a system that was supposed to honor it. The system changed the terms after the bet was placed. That is worth being angry about. It is also, eventually, worth moving past. Because the world that's arriving, the one being shaped right now by tools that no one fully understands yet, does not particularly care what the degree says. It cares what you can do, what you can adapt to, what you can build, with or without the credential that was supposed to make it simple. Millennials are, whatever else you want to say about them, extraordinarily adaptable. They have had to be. Even now, even still, somewhere, a millennial is opening a new tab. not to apply for another job that requires 5 years of experience, but to figure out what comes next, because that, more than any degree, is what they actually learned.